The reason why I was asking you about this is that I think it's important for us before we start on thinking about digital security to understand that when we talk about digital security, what are we talking about and what are we then not talking about as well, right? Because when digital conversations around digital security happen, a lot of the times the conversations are in very global north countries. It is assumed like digital security is for people who already know technology, who already know how to use a phone, right? Who know English and who can read and write in English. But when you assume and start digital security conversations from this perspective, then are you indirectly and very much directly saying that others don't deserve security? Others don't deserve to use a mobile phone and internet more securely? Because if that is where we are approaching it from, then already we are leaving out like a large part of the world. And when we talk about digital security, again, are we only talking about online security, which is like security in the internet, on the internet and internet platforms? Or is there also a need to expand it and talk actually about digital security in technology overall, right? And digital security against technology assisted, technology related violence overall. And it's a very subtle but important difference, because when you talk about online violence, you're still speaking about a certain space. But when you talk about tech related violence, it's a broader gamut. And I can give you an example for that. Like when we were doing workshops with a small group of youth leaders from a small town in eastern India, they were telling us that one of the biggest problem, digital security concerns that they face is actually of, they keep getting repeated missed calls on their phone. And someone would call them, unknown numbers would call them, and they would say that, oh, you are so pretty, I love you very much, or I want to marry you. And largely the callers were men, and the people who would get the calls were women, right? And young women and like young girls. And this calls, and the women who were getting the calls didn't understand where these numbers where they were getting the numbers. They didn't understand, why do they keep calling repeatedly? And they also didn't understand how do they specifically have the numbers of only the women in the community. And when we asked about it further, and when they asked around a little more, they realized that the numbers were going from, in shops where you can go and get recharge done. In India, you go give a number, your phone number, and the guy in the shop will do the recharge for you. It's from those shops. And like boys who had sisters would take their friends' numbers from their phone and pass it on to other boys. Some of them would just try random numbers, like 10-digit numbers. And when it's a woman, they would note it down and pass it on to other boys in the community, other men in the community. And this, when you look at online violence, this possibly will not fall into the gamut of it, because a lot of them use small feature phones. They don't use like smartphones, right? But it is very much tech related violence. And which is also why, like when we talk about security, it's also, and as Mickey was pointing out, where is the intersectionality coming in our conversations, right? Another thing is also like, when we talk about this, the reason to think about it in an intersectional way is also to see who is responsible for providing the security, no? Ideally, it should be the platform. Ideally, it should be your government who is ensuring your rights, but also your safety online. But is it actually the platforms or the government is another question. Is Facebook actually taking responsibility for the reports, for any comment or post that we're reporting there, right? Do we actually even know what's happening when we report a comment on Facebook, right? And yes, we can hold platforms accountable, and we should be holding platforms accountable, because it becomes, and this is a very similar thing that comes from offline violence, from physical violence. When a woman or a queer or trans person is attacked, they are told that, why do you look like this? Why are you gay, or why are you trans? Or they are asked questions like, why were you out at this time of the night? Why were you dressed like this, right? And these are the questions that are thrown at you, which very much says that you are responsible for your own safety, and you facing violence is your own mistake. And this gets translated onto the online spaces as well, where when you face violence, the platforms they either ask, why do you put up posts about being gay online? Why do you put posts on trans rights online, right? Why do you put up photos of yourself in certain dresses online, in certain outfits online. And because if you do these things, then of course you will get attacked. And this is very easy. It's like they put the onus of protecting yourself on the people who are facing the violence, and which is a very problematic stance. And this is something that the online space has learned from the offline space, because who are the people online? The same people from the physical world, right? And when we're talking about digital security, therefore, it's very important that we shift the onus. But at the same time, also see that when by the time but at the same time, we also need to recognize that it may be not very fast that platforms take accountability. It may be time before laws are formed, which will actually be rights affirming, which will actually be, will look at our safety without restricting our right to expression and freedom of expression and freedom of speech. So in that time, what can we do in this in-between space, right? How do we keep ourselves safe, at the same time hold platforms accountable? And another question is, do we have to do this alone? Because if you look at how trolls work online, they work in big gangs, they work in big groups, right? There are troll armies, what they call, on Reddit, on Facebook, on Twitter. So when you defend yourself as a single person, is that a fair fight? How do you expect yourself, you one person, to defend yourself against this hundreds of thousands of people who may be coming down on your profile because you said something against your prime minister or president, or because you said something against the government, or because you said that, I am a trans person and I deserve rights? How do you then it's also important that yes, government sponsored troll bots are also another thing. They automate it, right? They use technology. Hold on 1 minute, please. I'm sorry. Sorry, I live alone, so I had to get the door. Yeah, and then and so it shouldn't be that we are one person fighting against a whole army. So how do we imagine solidarity in this instances, right? And finally, when you think about digital security, how many of us immediately got things like privacy settings, like having a VPN, or having like an encrypted a YubiKey kind of like devices in mind immediately, right? Even passwords for that matter are these are steps that you take, one at a personal level for sure, but also a lot of our solutions immediately go with technology, right? And a lot of the solutions are based on technology. Now, this is not a bad thing. We should use technology to protect ourselves. We should definitely use technology and kind of reclaim it for our own protection, definitely. But we also must be very wary of not slipping into the gamut of tech solutionism. Right? Just having the technology will not protect us. Just having technology will not protect our communities. It's also important that we combine tools, which is the technology. In this case, technology is very much tools. We combine that with our politics, with our ethics, with our movement building, values. Because without bringing in your politics, your tools will just be tools. And tools can be extremely patriarchal, actually. Right? This idea that you must encrypt what is yours and keep it to yourself. This idea that you must use certain tools to protect yourself, as if it is absent from our identities, as if it is absent from our movements, right? And it's important that we combine both of this together. And because, and also to be fair, without this combination, without actually thinking about tools along with our politics, along with intersectional identities, we will be leaving out a lot of people. Because if we say tools are the solution, then what about the people who are just learning how to use smartphones, right? What about people who don't know English, so they are relying on colors and symbols on smartphones to navigate their way? So if your solution is technology alone and it's just tools, without actually looking at the politics of who has access to these tools, who has access to learning these tools, then our solution, our digital security will be very, it will be limited to the same people who currently already hold privileged positions in our community, in our society, right? Which is why it's important that we move beyond tech solutionism to actually incorporate politics, values, ethics in here. Um, and how do we, and another reason with like, another issue with like tech solution is that it's almost like you're using this tool to protect a profile, no? But profile is not just a profile, it's a person behind that. And it's essential to think about this because when we are protecting our profile, what are we protecting? We are protecting our data. But data is not disembodied. Data is not just numbers or words or facts, right? It is essential that we understand and we also like think about data as also bodies. Because in the current world where we are constantly holding our phone, no, does our body end where like skin touches air? Or does it go beyond that into our phones, into our apps? A lot of people who menstruate use menstrual apps for tracking, right? So when you, and in menstrual apps, they ask for a lot of very intimate details, like your flow rate, they ask you how frequently you menstruate, how was your menstrual cycle, did you have cramps? These are just few of the questions. Now, these are very intimate details, very personal physical details which you're giving there. So are you saying that your body stops right here? Or is that also part of your body? When you upload photos of yourself on social media, when you put out your views on Twitter, or when you put up photos of you with your friends on Facebook, are they not parts of your body as well? And this, what I'm seeing right now is actually based on a work by one of my colleagues, Dr. Anya Kovacs, who has done research on looking at data and bodies and bodies as data, and the importance and the need to put bodies behind data, right? And to understand that data is not just data, but there are people, actual people behind it, right? And without putting the people behind the data, we cannot actually talk about data in a rights-based manner. Otherwise, data will become this thing that we have to keep protecting. Whereas we need to realign our understanding to also look at data as people. And when you understand that data is also people, then you will think about it as protecting your data as protecting yourself. And that shifts the conversation a little forward, right? And so when we talk about security and we look at security as protecting data, which is security as protecting people, then we understand that, you know what, it's not just about protecting my profile, it's not just about protecting my phone, it's also protecting a part of myself. And as queer and trans persons and NB people, we know this more than anything. We know the importance of covering our phone and keeping. We know the importance of using multiple email IDs. We know the importance of having, not putting up our face maybe the first time we use a dating app. Or if we are making Facebook profile, we know, and I'm quite certain that at least some of us here have had two, I mean, I know I did, like have had multiple social media profiles. One which is for people who you're not out with, and like one where you can be your true self, and you can be yourself when you're exploring your gender and sexual identity. And in this case, like, is this separate from your actual personhood, right? And which is, and I think that this sort of realignment of thinking is necessary when we talk about digital security, because it's important that we shift beyond just looking at it as protecting our technology and our online spaces to actually thinking about it as protecting ourselves and our people, right? Now, this is on digital security at a personal level. Now, when you think about a campaign, when you're thinking about public campaigns, when you're thinking about campaigns online, then how do you think about security, right? Now, because the gamut is much bigger. Wait, I'm going to pause here for a minute to ask if there are any questions or if there are comments or anything that you want to bring in here or add or disagree with. Was I clear as I was speaking, or was it, do you want me to repeat something? Your screens with like the names don't tell me anything, la. So you need to like type it or say something or react. Thinking. Okay. If you have any questions at any point, you can just like show hand or something and pause and just like ask me. You don't have to wait till I finish. Um, because I think it's important that we also have this as a discussion. And another thing with digital security is that more often than not, it's seen as some people are experts and then they go and give their knowledge to everyone. Like in a very mocking way in Hindi, you say it as gyan. Like you give this knowledge, you're God dropping knowledge on everyone. It's like that. But I think that is actually, I don't think that works, because as a digital security facilitator, I believe that what you can do is you give information and then you give options, or you give a way of thinking, you help in a way of thinking, and then people based on their own lived realities and like context will decide on what is best for them. Because one of the other problems with digital security is that, and to have like tools and as solution, is that I can come and tell you that you must use this app, this app, this app. You should not use this website, you should not use this website. But the truth is that if your community is in these places, you will still go back there. No, I can tell you that WhatsApp is not good. I can tell you that Viber is bad. But if your community is on WhatsApp and it's on Viber, you cannot leave this immediately. No, you can't shift to a different messenger immediately. And even if you shift, will that be sustainable? How long will you keep using it before you go back to WhatsApp? Which is why it's important that, it's important to like give options, or like kind of like think, kind of like guide a thinking, so that people who need the digital security steps can decide for themselves that what is best for them. Because the truth is that my lived reality is very different from any of yours. It will also be very different from someone who lives downstairs from my apartment, no? And and it cannot be like one solution fits everyone kind of a system. Which is also why like I think it's important that we keep it as a discussion. And now, to move from here to thinking about how do we think about security when we're planning online campaigns, no? Because when you're planning online campaigns, the risks double, definitely, because you're doing it very, very specifically to reach more people. The more people you reach, though, the chances of you reaching, not reaching, but like it going to people who are trolls or who are homophobic or transphobic is also higher. So in that case, how do we plan and think about digital security when we are planning our campaigns? And I think one of the first steps to that is that when you're planning a campaign online, even in the planning process itself, you think about security. Now, how do you think about security? No, because there are so many moving parts, and this session is ideally for that. Because I think the tools that we use in each and every country is very, very different. Like, and so like teaching tools is not the ideal solution in my opinion, because tools you can email me later and ask, and I can help you. But I think when we are trying to think about new solutions, when you're trying to think collectively, we need people around us. Thinking alone is a very boring job, no? Like it's very boring to think alone. Like you're like, oh, okay, and then you get bored and then you move past. So it's not helpful. But because so many of us are here, and I think like when you talk about campaign and when you're thinking about security for the first time, it also really helps to have multiple identities in the room, multiple countries, multiple queer identities, multiple trans identities, and multiple socio-political, economical context from being in different spaces. I think because the point of intersectionality is that you think about different groups of people, you think about different identities, and you recognize that no one lives a single issue life. No one has a single identity. But because of our own lived realities, we sometimes cannot move past certain identities. So we need someone else who kind of like nudges us along that line. Hey, have you thought about this? Right? Like, so as a non-binary person who's like right now living in a city, I may not immediately think about people who don't speak English, but I may need someone who nudges me along the line to say like, hey, what if someone doesn't know English? How will they think about digital security, right? And I think that is there's a lot of power in that when you're talking about when you're thinking, especially.